You guys, this is just an amazing project. I mean, and one of the things that listeners need to understand that this didn't just happen. You guys have held on to this for so long.
Well, it's a hard story to wrap your arms around because decade by decade, there were new twists and turns. And, that was part of what fascinated me with the project, and I'm sure Allison as well.
Well, Michael, how did you even get your hands around this? And I think there's probably still things that you haven't got your arms around yet because, I mean, like you said, it just keeps changing.
Well, I moved to Los Angeles in the mid-'80s, and this was right in the middle of this case. There were multiple trials in the 1980s, and then it was totally an unrequited justice story. But then it reemerged after 2000. And so it is a story that keeps giving. And so it's fascinated me for a long time. And by virtue of my former life as a journalist and my more recent life as a novelist, I ended up knowing almost all the detectives that were involved in this case. And they talk about it from time to time. They introduced me to Scott Thorson, who's kind of like our through line character, who carries a lot of the story because of his fascinating life and story. And, so at one point I said, I should tell this story because there's been movies, there's been books, there's been other documentaries, but nothing that really kind of brought it all together.
Yeah, because many of us read about this story through the National Enquirer, and therefore we drew up our own, interpretation of the storyline itself.
Yeah, this is the kind of story that goes from the National Enquirer to the New York Times, which I love that they looked at Scott Thorson and called him the Zelig of awful. And I think that really kind of wraps up what he was about. But yeah, I mean, this is a story that not only all levels of media, but it touches all levels of society and has a kind of a historical importance to me, at least, about how this villainous drug dealer in Laurel Canyon really was part of changing society.
Well, Allison, you had to have been called into this because the story had to be told. I mean, this wasn't pretty much in your backyard?
No, not really. I had just finished Laurel Canyon, A Place in Time, which is about the music scene in Laurel Canyon and the bucolic neighborhood and these houses where all this creativity happened. And this story was the negative image of that. And so I was intrigued to dive into it with that in mind, because it's like things had turned upside down.
How do you go from a project like that? Because I was addicted to your documentary and I felt like I still didn't get enough, but now you're on the opposite side of that showing something else.
Yeah. And we wanted to take a very, film noir negative image approach to this. And I wanted, they had been doing the podcast and Michael had shared with me some of his interviews that he had done with Scott in preparation for that. And they were Zoom interviews and I could see the kind of cat and mouse game going on. And we've got to get this on camera visually because it's so interesting seeing, Michael push Scott for answers because the answers sometimes seem so outrageous.
Mm-hmm. So California, the way I look at it.
Yeah.
So Michael, I love this about the storyline. There's a little truth in every lie, and you had to go through that and figure out what was the truth.
Yeah, I mean, it was really when Alison said she wanted me on camera interviewing these people, I first was probably reluctant, but then I realized, I've been watching and writing about detectives for 40 years. And now it was my chance to be the detective and to answer the questions. And that was the thing. Scott Thorson is the through line of the story. He was the guy who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had knowledge about the origins of this quadruple murder. And, he's also almost a lifelong drug addict. So it's one of these things where you have to parse his answers and confirm stuff or deny it. And he told some outlandish stories, had like an outlandish life, but most of it we were able to document. And what you see on the screen, I stand behind because of the way we went about confirming details, through documents, through prior interviews, through detectives having to solidify his story before they would allow him to testify in court and so forth. And that to me was my through line. That was fascinating to me. And I think that is, Alison captured that on the film.
Yeah, I can't imagine what you had to go through with that footage, Alison, in the way that, it's all there, but there was always more that you could find.
Yeah, I mean, there's amazing archive material that we were able to dig up on this, and including like this when Scott gets shot in Jacksonville, Florida. I mean, who would have thought there'd be local coverage of that? And that was like amazing. And then the young interviews with Scott, we don't reveal until the 4th episode where those interviews come from, and when it's revealed where they come from, you're just even more shocked.
When you went out to L.A., Michael, was it something was it the fantasy jog out to L.A.? And then when you got there, it's like, oh, there's a bigger story here than I could ever imagine.
Well, I think that's pretty much what happens in L.A. There's always roots and stories that anything can be blown up bigger than it appears at first. I was a journalist for a long time. I covered crime for like 14 years for multiple newspapers, and really felt like I came home when I moved to LA in the 80s. And, my ultimate goal was to write novels, but I viewed my journalism career as research for that. I loved watching detectives work and writing about these kind of cases. And this one is very novelistic to me. You have an unreliable narrator in Scott Thorson. You got to check out everything he says. As one of our detectives says in the documentary, he talks out of both sides of his mouth.
Yep.
And then you have a villain in Eddie Nash who, every novel has to have the detectives, the cops going up against a really strong adversary. And Eddie Nash is the guy who kept slipping through their fingers.
Alison, did you ask the question many times, how many killers could there have been here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the detectives all pretty much feel that it had to have been at least 4 to 5 people that went in there to have done that damage, that much damage that quickly without, because they didn't even have time to wake up. Only one of them fought back.
Scott was the only survivor, so therefore, did he go through a spiritual journey? Do you know, Michael?
Well, he says he did, and we document that, but with him, you always got to wonder, was this a money-making operation for him, or did he really feel like he was looking for redemption and religion? And I think the viewers are going to have to decide that. I think we make it pretty clear that he is a guy, no matter what situation he is in, he thinks about, how can I benefit? How can I turn this towards me? How do I benefit from this? How do I make money? How do I buy drugs?
Alison, I mean, one of the things that's very interesting here that listeners need to know is that, we all think of California being the city that it is, and we think of, in the 1980s with the drug abuse, that's Compton. That Compton had that image. But in Laurel Canyon?
Yeah, I mean, the drugs came into Laurel Canyon. That's why some of those artists left too. It's like, the whole thing turned around. And then, then the crack epidemic that Scott and Nash were involved with in early stages. Michael was a journalist back then and covered a quadruple murder in that realm of the story, and didn't get nearly the attention that the Wonderland case did.
Do you think that's because of the connection with Liberace?
Definitely that has something to do with it, but it's, I mean, there's celebrities, but it was also this, these were Black people killed in a neighborhood that nobody was caring about. So the story went ignored, other than the writing that Michael was doing.
Michael, getting that interviewed before the transition, I can't imagine what your show prep was, or did you go into it being a listener because you knew what kind of a speaker he was?
I was somewhat prepared. I've had a relationship with Scott for, I guess it was going on 4 years. When I first started talking to him, he was actually in prison in Nevada. And then he was on a probation where he couldn't leave Las Vegas. So I did a lot of Zooms with him. And I did a podcast with him. But as Alison said, the podcast can't even touch what we did in this documentary, especially with all the visual archives.
Yeah.
and how all that is pulled together in these 4 parts.
Well, Allison, the directing and the producing of this at the level that you have, to me, this embraces so many needs that we do as podcast listeners as well as documentary people, because you've got true crime here, you've got journalism, you've got a storyline here. I mean, you're covering every single plate.
Yeah, I mean, this story, it couldn't have been a richer story to dive into. And again, with all of the amazing archival material we found. And we wanted to have it, have a film noir look. And we, stylized our recreations that way. Even the shots of Michael driving around LA are kind of moody. And we wanted LA to be a character in this and to have a presence in this story as well.
Wow, I just can't imagine how you're still holding on to this, Michael, and how you deal with it. I mean, are you taking notes almost like every day?
Pretty much. I mean, the thing about this case is, and I've done other podcasts and documentaries and so forth. And sometimes people or most of the time, people are reluctant to talk about cases way in the past. And this one, from the prosecutors to the detectives who kept passing the baton of the investigation, they all wanted to talk. And I think that comes back to how it's all stuck in their craw that people got away with this. And there were some levels of justice, but ultimately justice was not served in this case. And so they wanted to talk about it. In a way, it was an exorcism for them to talk about it. Wow.
I love the title of the episode, The Heat of a Cold Case. That is so like, oh, I've got to dig into this.
Yeah, that came from a line from Rick Jackson when he and Michael were talking. That's right out of that scene.
So what did you learn from this project, and what do you continue to learn from it, Allison? Because, I mean, once again, this is a story that just, it's so Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, it's Hollywood, but it is, it's about society and how things can, this darker side of what happened there with the crack epidemic. I mean, to think that Nash and Scott were that involved in something so early on that the cops didn't even know what was happening.
Wow. Now, Michael, will the two of you continue to have a collaboration? Because there are mysteries all over this nation.
Yeah, no, I hope we do. And we're talking about something, the subhead, as you mentioned, The Secret History of Hollywood. That is attractive to us as journalists, as filmmakers, but I think it's also attractive to viewers and people who are drawn to the genre of true crime. And I think that's our strike zone. And I think that's what we're going to talk about, doing something else in that regard.
In 1990, Scott testified against the alleged mastermind. I mean, that had to have been a very, very tight room.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's funny. You used to, the alleged mastermind. What a hook just to say we have a story with a mastermind. You need a big villain and a really villain who's difficult to bring to justice. And we have that in the story. And as Alison said, the archival stuff that we got in this, that dramatic testimony of Scott Thorson, which we have in the film here, it's really gripping. And then to go from that, from 1990 and an interview we did with him earlier this year, it's really a fascinating journey.
It's so funny that we talk about 1990 like it was just yesterday, and yet, I mean, the story itself feels like it is today. I mean, I guess we give you the credit, Allison.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because the story took place over so many decades and each time something new was being revealed, that it feels like it takes us up to present day. But, it was really 2001 when this basically ended.
Wow. Well, we got to give your team kudos because you had a whole team with you to create this, Allison.
Yeah, we sure did. We had amazing producers with Jen and Nick and Tess Ranahan and brilliant editors, and the whole editorial team was amazing. And it was a lot of work to get it to make sense, but we finally got there.
Did they sit in rooms and talk about it to see if they could solve the crime?
No, not really.
I was just going to say, we were kind of in awe of the detectives who carried this case through the decades, that they didn't give up, that most of them are retired now, or they all are retired, although some are volunteer cold case investigators. And if they could, they they'd be working this case right now.
Yeah, let's talk about those investigators, because you even said it a little bit earlier that so many people are tight-lipped about the, different crimes. How were you able to get inside and really pay attention to what they felt and experienced?
Well, I think I was lucky. Some of these people I knew when I was a journalist, and then some I met as a novelist. And, I think detectives are kind of like reticent to open up their world to you. Mm-hmm. But in my novels, I would say the overall theme of everything I've been doing in fiction is to explain what this job is about, what it takes to do it right, what, when you go into human darkness, as a matter of course, some of that darkness gets into you. And those are the themes of the books I write. And that has connected me in ways to real detectives who know I'm trying to get it right. And so they are willing to talk to me. And I think that was very helpful. So coming to them, not as a former journalist, but as a novelist, I think really kind of opened up some doors for us.
How has this documentary with Alison changed you as a podcaster?
It's made me say I should give up doing podcasts and stick to the visual mediums, because, as we've been talking about, the archival, her production team, they got stuff that I never couldn't even come close to getting when I did a podcast.
Wow. Alison, what is the next step for you?
Well, like I said, Michael and I are exploring the theme of secret history of Hollywood. So hopefully we'll have another project that we can get off the ground. I'm finishing a film about Culture Club right now, the band.
Really? Oh my God. Can you talk about that for a sec? Or...
Yeah, sure. It's really about the band. We got all 4 members to go on camera, which was, not an easy thing to do, because there's a little bit of disgruntled unhappiness there. But hopefully, I hope this film will actually be very healing for them, because it's a beautiful story.
Oh, I was going to say, it's a love story. It started out as a love story. Oh my God. And and what they did to the early part of the 1980s is still inside my heart.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is going to be. I think it's going to be very healing for them. I hope. Wow.
Well, your time with that band that had to be a blessing, because they, especially with Boy George, who I still think is one of the most spiritual people.
Yeah, I have a picture I saw the eclipse with Boy George last year.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, when that comes out, we've all got to get back together again. Okay, guys?
Sure.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, you be brilliant today. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.